Just steps from her door north of Montreal, Carol Fortin finds a walk along the water is serene and calm. It's the way she likes to remember her son, Jimmy. That's him on the left. Long after he'd grown into a man, she still looked out for him. Jimmy needed that, sometimes living with her, sometimes on his own.
Jimmy était d'une façon, lui, qui était un gentleman de la rue.
The streets of Montreal were his other home. For 11 years, on and off, he'd sought shelter and food at the old brewery mission.
J'ai dit, pourquoi Jimmy, t'aimes ça, tenir dans... Comment ça se fait? Tu sais, qu'est-ce qui t'attire, là, Jim? Puis là, il me dit, même, j'aime Montréal, tout ça, mais aussi, ces gens-là, ils m'ont sauvé la vie, man. Fait que c'est pour ça que ça me fait du chagrin que c'est là qu'il a perdu.
In fact, he lost his life just outside the doors of the shelter in January 2017. Montreal police suspected he'd stabbed someone nearby. They weren't badly injured, but when police found Jimmy, the confrontation was quick and, for him, deadly. This is a scenario that's played out beyond Montreal. As a CBC News investigation revealed earlier this year, over the past 2 decades, many of the people who've died in confrontations with police had mental health problems. Jimmy's had shown up in his teens, schizophrenia. He had run-ins with police, but in the community of people he met at the mission, he felt comfortable. It's where he went that day. A security camera shows police arriving to question Jimmy. He tries to walk away, then drops what he's holding and fishes a knife out of his pocket. Only seconds after rounding the corner and out of the frame of the camera, investigators say he lunged at officers. He was shot and killed.
This is the epicenter of homelessness in Montreal.
Matthew Pierce runs the mission and says Jimmy's death felt too familiar. That's because he was the 4th homeless person killed by Montreal police in recent years.
You can tell even from the section of videotape that you have that what transpired really quickly.
Very quickly. They came out guns drawn, more or less. They didn't come out and say, let's have a conversation. He looks dangerous, we better draw our guns.
It's the speed with which things spun out of control that Pierce says he'd seen too many times. An ill and frightened person who didn't know how to react to police, and officers trained to act quickly and decisively to contain a situation. It pushed him to insist that things change. The key, he believes, is giving an agitated person time to calm down, to really hear what's being said to them, to control their responses. Those who knew Jimmy well, like Jean Demers, who works at the shelter, believe that given more space and time, Jimmy would have handed over the knife.
It's good French for me too, though. I don't have a problem for this guy. You know, like you said, you have a knife. Me, I come to her, he said, you gave me the knife, he gave me that.
Pierce and the then chief of police in Montreal agreed there were lessons in what the tape shows. And what's unfolded in the months since are changes designed to see if they can prevent it happening again. Police officers have started taking shifts serving meals, not in street clothes, but in uniform, to try to make it seem less threatening. And by the end of June, more than 1,000 new police recruits and veterans will have taken a class put together with help from the shelter. Lessons range from dispelling stereotypes about homelessness to how to talk to someone who's ill and agitated.
It sort of begs the question, why is it taking this long to get here if the solutions are simple?
Maybe when the first person was killed, I should have done what I did when the 4th person was killed and demand a meeting with the police chief. Maybe that might have led to different outcomes for Jimmy Cloutier and other people. It's a hard question you ask, and I think there's no good answer except we should have done it earlier, we didn't, so let's get to it now.
Hi, Carlo.
Hi, what's her name?
Carlo.
Carlo, too?
Police officers like Carlo DeAngelis say there's a growing recognition that some calls are simply going to take longer to resolve successfully.
Normally, you go on a regular call, it might take you 15, 20 minutes. With somebody that has mental issues, maybe it'll take an hour, 15 minutes, and it's okay. You know, you got to make the person feel comfortable and go at their pace.
Officers have started stopping by the shelter, not to answer a call, but to have a coffee. Staff like Vincent Osrout say the reaction to police being in the shelter has changed.
It's changed a lot in the sense that we communicate a lot more with them. They're more present and I don't know how to qualify it, but they're more decent in a sense that they take more time now.
Much of the discussion about what to learn from Jimmy Cloutier's death has happened without his mother's input. She hasn't been able to bring herself to read any of the accounts of what happened, but she's glad others have.
Ces personnes-là, ils ont des mamans, puis ils ont des frères, des familles. Et puis oui, c'est important qu'il y ait une différence. Parce qu'il y aurait eu le droit de vivre encore. Moi, je l'attends encore. Je l'attends encore. Je le vois dans sa chambre, je le vois tout partout.
I think of Jimmy when I walk past here, as I'm sure many of the other people who use our services do. So he's not forgotten, and maybe in some way we could hope that he would have, if he knew that his death was going to bring this kind of an outcome, he might feel that his life had some meaning after all.
An independent investigation into the shooting has been finished but not made public. No one has been charged. Instead, it's likely his story will be remembered less for what happened the day he died, but for what came after. Diana Swain, CBC News, Montreal.
And while we wait on the results of that investigation Diana mentioned, it's worth noting, of the 461 cases where someone died during an interaction with police, CBC could identify just 18 cases where criminal charges were laid against an officer. And of those, there were 2 convictions.